No one noticed the silence at first. In a busy neighborhood where doors opened early and closed late, silence felt normal. People assumed the house was simply resting, the way it always did after a long day. But behind those clean walls and polished windows, a secret had been growing for months. A secret that would end in blood, broken trust, and a question that still hangs heavy in the air: how did a hidden affair turn into a tragedy no one could stop? This story begins far away from the place where it would end. It begins in Morocco, in a small town where life moved slowly and choices were limited. For many young women there, domestic work abroad promised hope. A steady income. A chance to support family back home. And maybe, just maybe, a better future. Among them was a quiet woman in her mid-20s. We will call her Amina. That is not her real name, but it protects the dignity of a woman whose life became a headline instead of a dream. Amina grew up in a modest home. Her father worked when work was available. Her mother held the family together with patience and prayer. School ended early for Amina, not because she lacked talent, but because money ran out. By her early 20s, she was already carrying the weight of responsibility. When an agent spoke of a job as a live-in maid for a wealthy family abroad, it sounded like an answer to every problem. The pay was more than she could earn in years back home. The family, she was told, was kind and respected. The countries she traveled to felt like another world. Tall buildings. Wide roads. Homes that looked more like palaces than houses. The family she joined lived comfortably. The employer, a man in his early 40s, was known in the area as successful and disciplined. Married. A father. Someone people trusted. His wife managed the household. Their lives appeared stable from the outside, the kind people quietly admired. Amina's role was simple. Clean. Cook. Care for the home. Stay out of the family's personal matters. At first, that is exactly what she did. She worked long hours, kept her head down, and followed every rule. She spoke little, smiled politely, and stayed invisible. That is often what families expect from domestic workers: loyalty without presence, service without a voice. But homes are strange places. When people live close, walls hear everything. Eyes notice details no one means to reveal. Over time, small moments began to shift. A greeting that lasted a second too long. A question asked when no one else was around. A compliment slipped into a normal conversation. Nothing obvious. Nothing that could be pointed out. But enough to change the air between two people. The employer noticed Amina in ways he never should have. He saw her loneliness. Her dependence on the job. Her silence. And instead of respecting the distance that should exist, he crossed it slowly, carefully, as if testing how far he could go without being stopped. Power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers. For Amina, the attention felt confusing. She was far from home. Far from family. She had no one to talk to, no place to escape to at the end of the day. When someone in power shows warmth in such isolation, it can feel like kindness. It can feel like care. And that is how dangerous lines get blurred. The affair did not begin suddenly. It grew. It hid itself in routine. In moments when the wife was out. In late evenings when the house was quiet. It was built on secrecy, fear, and unequal control. Amina knew it was wrong. She also knew refusing could cost her job, her income, her family's support back home. This is the part many people judge quickly, without understanding how trapped someone can feel when their survival depends on silence. Outside the house, nothing changed. Neighbors saw a normal family. Friends visited. Life went on. Inside, tension thickened. Amina carried guilt and confusion. The employer carried confidence, believing he could manage both worlds without consequence. Affairs like this often survive not because they are strong, but because everyone involved believes they can stop before it's too late. But secrets do not like staying quiet. Small mistakes started happening. A message sent at the wrong time. A look that lingered too long. A pattern noticed by someone who knew the house better than anyone else, the wife. She felt something was off. She could not name it, but she felt it in the way her husband moved through the house, in the way Amina avoided her eyes. Suspicion is a slow poison. It grows in silence, feeding on unanswered questions. The wife began watching, listening, testing. And while the affair remained hidden, the balance inside that house was already breaking. This is where many true crime stories pause, right before everything falls apart. Because once trust cracks, it never breaks cleanly. It shatters. And the pieces cut everyone involved. Suspicion does not arrive like a storm. It arrives like a quiet drip, slow and steady, until the damage can no longer be ignored. In that house, everything still looked perfect from the outside. Clean floors. Warm meals. A polite maid who did her work without complaint. A husband who left for work each morning and returned on time. A wife who smiled at guests and kept the family image intact. But beneath that image, something was wrong, and the wife could feel it. She noticed small changes first. Her husband had become distant, yet strangely alert. He guarded his phone more than before. He seemed irritated by simple questions, as if conversation itself annoyed him. When she spoke, his attention drifted. And then there was Amina. The maid who once moved freely through the house now walked carefully, like someone afraid of making noise. She avoided eye contact. She rushed through rooms when the wife entered. These were not mistakes a trained eye would miss. At first, the wife blamed herself. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe stress was playing tricks on her mind. That is often how suspicion begins, wrapped in self-doubt. But the feeling did not go away. It grew stronger each day, fed by silence and unanswered instincts. She began to watch more closely, not openly, but quietly. Listening from behind doors. Noting who was where and when. Amina felt the shift too. She sensed eyes on her back, questions forming before words were spoken. The safety she once felt, fragile as it was, began to disappear. Fear replaced confusion. She knew that if the truth came out, she would be the one blamed first. Not the married man. Not the employer with power and respect. But the maid. The foreign woman. The easy target. The employer noticed the tension but believed he could control it. Men like him often think they are smarter than the situation. He reassured Amina in private, telling her not to worry, promising protection. But his promises were empty. He was protecting himself, not her. Every step he took was about keeping his life intact, even if hers fell apart. The affair became harder to hide. The risk increased, and with it, the pressure. Amina wanted out. She began pulling away, emotionally and physically. She talked about returning home, about finding another job. But leaving was not simple. Her passport was not with her. Her money was limited. Her options were few. What started as secrecy now felt like a trap. The wife finally decided to test her suspicion. One afternoon, she returned home earlier than usual without informing anyone. The house was quiet, too quiet. No sounds of cleaning. No movement. Her heart raced as she walked through the hallway. She did not catch them together that day, but she noticed signs, disorder where there should have been none. A door that had been closed now open. A tension in the air that confirmed her fears. From that moment, her behavior changed. Her kindness toward Amina turned cold. Instructions became sharp. Small mistakes were punished. The atmosphere inside the house became heavy, filled with unspoken accusations. Amina felt it deeply. Every day felt like walking on broken glass. She barely slept. She barely ate. Anxiety followed her from room to room. Instead of stopping the affair, the pressure made it more dangerous. Fear creates reckless choices. Meetings became rushed. Words became harsh. The employer grew angry, blaming Amina for the risk, even though he had created it. Power shifted into control, and control into threat. He reminded her who owned the house, who decided her future. The wife confronted her husband indirectly at first. Questions about his schedule. About his phone. About why he seemed so distant. Each time, he denied everything. He became defensive, even aggressive. Arguments grew frequent, louder, more emotional. The children, if any were present, noticed the tension. Homes like this often carry pain that reaches everyone, even those not involved. Amina overheard arguments late at night. She heard her name mentioned once, spoken sharply, like an insult. That was when she realized the truth was close to the surface. Panic set in. She considered running away, but fear held her back. Where would she go? Who would help her? Stories of maids being accused, detained, or abandoned played in her mind. Silence had protected her once. Now it was destroying her. Then came the confrontation she could not avoid. One evening, the wife called Amina into the living room. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were not. She asked direct questions. Simple questions. Questions that left no room to hide. Amina froze. Her silence said more than words ever could. The truth did not explode in that moment, it sank in slowly, painfully. The wife's world collapsed quietly. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from inside the home. Anger, humiliation, and heartbreak mixed together, creating something dangerous. Something unstable. The employer arrived home to a house already on edge. The argument that followed was intense. Voices raised. Accusations thrown like weapons. Amina stood nearby, shaking, realizing she was now trapped between two forces far stronger than her. This was no longer about love or secrecy. It was about control, honor, and consequences. By the end of that night, nothing was the same. Trust was broken beyond repair. The affair was no longer hidden. And when secrets come into the open, they often bring destruction with them. Once the truth was exposed, the house stopped feeling like a home. It became a place of tension, anger, and fear. Every room carried the weight of what had been discovered. The wife barely slept that night. Her mind replayed every small moment she had ignored, every sign she had chosen not to see. Betrayal has a way of rewriting the past, making everything suddenly clear and painfully sharp. For the employer, exposure changed everything. His confidence vanished, replaced by panic. He was no longer a man balancing two lives. He was a man afraid of losing everything: his marriage, his reputation, his standing in society. And when people like him feel cornered, they do not think about what is right. They think about survival. Amina woke up the next morning feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She moved through the house slowly, unsure of what she was allowed to do, or if she even belonged there anymore. The wife's eyes followed her everywhere. Not with loud anger, but with something colder. Disgust. Disappointment. Hurt. It was the kind of look that made Amina wish she could disappear. The wife did not scream. She did not attack. That silence was more frightening than shouting. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were sharp and controlled. She told her husband that the maid would leave. Immediately. No discussions. No excuses. In her mind, removing Amina meant removing the problem. But problems like this do not leave so easily. The employer pretended to agree, but inside, his thoughts raced. If Amina left, she might talk. She might tell her family. She might tell authorities. The power he once held over her was slipping away. And that scared him more than his wife's anger ever could. Amina was called in again, this time with both of them present. The wife told her she would be sent back home. No pay discussion. No apology. Just an order. Amina nodded, tears filling her eyes. She wanted to speak, to explain, to defend herself. But words felt useless. She knew that in their eyes she was the wrong one. Later that day, the employer found a moment alone with Amina. His tone was different now. No warmth. No comfort. Only pressure. He warned her not to speak about what had happened. He reminded her of her position, her lack of protection. He told her that if she caused trouble, things could become very difficult for her. These were not empty words. In that country, domestic workers often have very little legal power. Fear wrapped itself tightly around Amina's chest. She realized she had been naive to trust him. What she thought was care had always been control. She was not a partner. She was a risk that needed to be managed. The wife, meanwhile, was dealing with her own storm. Society expected her to stay calm, to protect the family image. Blaming the maid was easier than facing the deeper betrayal. Friends and relatives were beginning to sense something was wrong. Questions were coming. Pressure was building from all sides. Arguments between the couple grew worse. The husband denied responsibility. He shifted blame. He accused his wife of neglect, of being distant. She accused him of destroying the family. Words turned cruel. Old wounds surfaced. The house echoed with anger late into the night. Amina listened from her small room, heart pounding with every raised voice. She packed her few belongings slowly, unsure when she would be forced to leave. She thought about her family back home. How would she explain this? How would she return with nothing, carrying shame instead of success? At the same time, the employer's behavior became unpredictable. Some moments he acted calm, almost normal. Other moments he was tense, watching every move Amina made. It felt like he was planning something, though what that was remained unclear. This uncertainty was terrifying. The wife began talking about involving authorities or family elders. That idea pushed the employer closer to the edge. Exposure was his greatest fear. Not because of love lost, but because of status threatened. People who live for respect often fear disgrace more than punishment. One evening, another heated argument broke out. This time, it was louder, more aggressive. Accusations flew freely. The wife demanded answers. The husband demanded silence. Amina stayed locked in her room, trembling, praying it would end without pulling her back into the conflict. But fate does not always listen to prayers. By now, emotions had crossed a dangerous line. Anger mixed with fear creates a state where logic disappears. Decisions made in such moments are rarely reversible. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Amina sensed that she was no longer safe. Not emotionally. Not physically. She considered escaping that night, leaving everything behind. But fear stopped her again. Fear of being caught. Fear of being blamed. Fear of the unknown outside those walls. The employer, on the other hand, felt time running out. He believed control was slipping away. And when control is lost, some people reach for extreme solutions. That night did not begin with violence. It began like many others, heavy and quiet, filled with words that were never spoken. The house was tense in a way that could be felt in the air. Even simple sounds, the click of a light switch, footsteps in the hallway, felt louder than usual. Everyone inside that home was awake, even when they pretended to sleep. Amina lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Her suitcase sat half-packed near the door. A few clothes. Personal items she had brought from Morocco. Nothing that showed months of her life spent serving this family. She felt numb, as if her emotions had shut down to protect her. She knew she was supposed to leave soon, but no one had told her exactly when. That uncertainty was torture. In another room, the wife sat alone, her thoughts spinning. Anger came in waves, followed by sadness, then humiliation. She thought about her marriage, her years of trust, and how everything had shattered because of lies. She wondered how long people around her had known, or suspected. The fear of judgment weighed heavily on her chest. In her world, shame was not private, it spread quickly. The employer paced the living room, restless. His phone buzzed with messages he ignored. His mind was racing, jumping from one worst-case scenario to another. He imagined his reputation destroyed. His family name dragged through gossip. His career questioned. None of his thoughts focused on Amina as a human being. To him, she had become a problem that needed to disappear quietly. Earlier that evening, the wife had made her position clear. She wanted Amina gone by morning. No delays. No excuses. The argument that followed was bitter. The husband agreed on the surface but said little. His silence hid his real intentions. Amina heard the argument end abruptly. Doors closed. Footsteps faded. She stayed still, listening. The house went quiet, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Sometime after midnight, Amina heard a knock on her door. Soft but firm. Her heart raced. She knew who it was before she opened it. The employer stood there, his face unreadable. He asked her to step outside her room. His voice was low, controlled. She hesitated but obeyed. Refusing felt dangerous. They moved into a common area of the house. The lights were dim. Shadows stretched across the walls. He spoke in a hushed tone, telling her that things had gone too far. That she needed to cooperate if she wanted to leave safely. His words were confusing, mixed with warnings and false reassurance. He said he would arrange everything, but only if she promised silence. Amina felt a wave of panic. She told him she wanted to go home. She said she would not cause trouble. She just wanted to leave. Her voice shook as she spoke. She was trying to survive, not negotiate. But something in him snapped. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the realization that he no longer controlled the situation. His tone changed. The calm disappeared. He accused her of ruining his life. Of being ungrateful. Of threatening everything he had built. These accusations were unfair, but in his mind, they justified his behavior. The wife, still awake, heard voices. She got out of bed quietly and stood near the hallway, listening. She could not hear every word, but she knew something was happening. Her heart pounded. She felt pulled between confronting the situation and staying back. Fear held her in place. Amina realized then that she was alone. Truly alone. The man in front of her was not there to help her leave. He was there to protect himself. She took a step back, instinctively trying to create distance. That movement only made things worse. What happened next unfolded quickly, yet it felt slow, like time stretched painfully thin. Raised voices. A struggle. Panic taking over reason. The details that emerged later would be pieced together through evidence and testimony. But one thing was certain. Control had turned into violence. The wife rushed in when she heard the commotion. What she saw in that moment would haunt her forever. Chaos. Fear. A situation spiraling beyond anyone's ability to stop it. She screamed. Her voice broke the silence of the house, but it came too late. When everything stopped, the house fell into a silence heavier than before. A silence filled with shock and disbelief. Amina lay motionless. The reality of what had happened settled in slowly, like a nightmare that refused to end. The employer stood frozen, his mind struggling to accept what he had done. Panic returned, stronger than ever. This was no longer a secret affair. This was a crime. A life had been lost, and nothing could undo that. The wife collapsed, her world destroyed in a single moment. The anger she once felt was replaced by horror. The house that once held routine and order was now a crime scene, though no one had yet called it that. Minutes passed. Then more. Decisions were made in fear, not logic. The employer began thinking about escape, about stories, about lies. The instinct to protect himself overpowered everything else. The wife, trapped between loyalty and shock, struggled to understand what to do. Outside, the neighborhood slept peacefully, unaware that a life had ended just steps away. No screams reached the street. No alarms were raised. Tragedy often hides behind closed doors, unseen until it is too late. By dawn, the truth would begin its slow journey into the light. But in that dark night, all that existed was silence, fear, and the irreversible weight of what had been done. Morning light has a cruel way of exposing what darkness tries to hide. As dawn crept into the house, it revealed a reality no one inside was ready to face. The night had changed everything. There was no going back to arguments, secrets, or denial. A life had been lost, and fear now ruled every decision. The employer was the first to move. Sleep never came to him. His mind replayed the night again and again, each time ending the same way. His hands shook. His thoughts were scattered. Panic sat heavy in his chest, making it hard to breathe. He knew one thing clearly: if the truth came out, his life as he knew it was over. The wife sat in silence, her face pale, her eyes empty. She felt trapped between shock and disbelief. Part of her wanted to scream, to run outside and call for help. Another part of her felt frozen, weighed down by fear and confusion. Loyalty, fear of scandal, fear of losing everything, these emotions tangled together, making it impossible to think clearly. Amina lay where she had fallen, still and silent. The house felt wrong without her quiet movements, without the sound of her work. Only hours ago, she had been alive, scared, hoping to leave and start over. Now, she was reduced to a terrible truth no one wanted to name out loud. The employer began talking fast, his words tumbling over each other. He spoke about accidents, misunderstandings, and mistakes. He said they needed to think carefully, to stay calm. He reminded his wife of their children, their reputation, their future. He did not speak about justice. He spoke about damage control. This was the first mistake. In moments like these, fear convinces people they are smarter than the truth. It tells them they can manage chaos if they move quickly enough. The employer believed that if he controlled the story, he could control the outcome. He underestimated how hard it is to hide reality. The wife listened but did not respond much. Her mind was far away, trapped in the image of what she had seen. She felt sick. Every plan he suggested felt wrong, but fear kept her quiet. Speaking up meant facing everything at once. Staying silent felt easier, at least for the moment. Hours passed. The sun rose higher. Normal life outside continued. Neighbors left for work. Cars passed by. No one suspected that inside that house, two people were trying to decide what to do with the body, and with their own guilt. The employer insisted they needed time. Time to think. Time to prepare. He told his wife not to call anyone, not family, not authorities. He said panic would only make things worse. In reality, panic had already taken control. The wife finally asked a question that cut through his frantic planning. "What about her family?" Her voice was quiet, broken. "What will they be told?" The employer hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Amina's family, her mother waiting for money, her father hoping she was safe, none of them fit into his plan. They were not part of his world. To him, they were distant, inconvenient, and invisible. He answered vaguely, saying they would handle it later. That answer settled something heavy in the wife's heart. She realized then that the man she had married was capable of choices she never imagined. Fear had stripped away whatever decency she believed he still had. As the day went on, the employer made more calls, careful ones. Not to police. Not to emergency services. To people he believed could help quietly. People who owed him favors. People who understood the value of silence. Each call pushed him deeper into a web of lies that would soon tighten around him. The wife watched all of this unfold like a stranger in her own life. She felt complicit, even though she had done nothing directly. Silence can feel like guilt when tragedy is involved. Every minute that passed without calling for help weighed heavier on her conscience. Meanwhile, the absence of Amina did not go unnoticed for long. The house relied on her presence more than anyone admitted. Meals were missed. Tasks left undone. The routine was broken. Even small disruptions can raise questions. Later that afternoon, a neighbor casually asked the wife if the maid had gone somewhere. The question was innocent, but it felt like an attack. The wife forced a smile and gave a simple answer. She hated herself for how easily the lie came out. Inside, panic surged again. The employer became more aggressive in his planning. He insisted they needed to act before someone else did. He talked about moving things, about creating a story that would explain Amina's disappearance. Each suggestion crossed another line. This was the second mistake. Disappearances draw attention. People notice when someone simply vanishes, especially in a place where domestic workers are already vulnerable. The employer believed Amina's position would make her disappearance easier to explain away. He was wrong. By nightfall, the house felt like a prison. The walls seemed closer. Every sound from outside felt threatening. The wife barely spoke anymore. She was drowning in regret, replaying every moment that led them here. She thought about confronting the truth, about calling authorities, but fear still held her back. The employer, on the other hand, was focused only on himself. His thoughts were no longer about survival for everyone involved, only survival for him. In his mind, everything that followed was justified because he believed he had no other choice. But there is always a choice. And choosing fear over truth often leads to consequences far worse than the truth itself. Somewhere far away, Amina's family went about their day, unaware that their daughter's life had ended in a place she once believed would give her hope. No message came. No call. Only silence. That silence would not last forever. Silence can work for a short time, but it always leaves fingerprints behind. By the second day, the absence of Amina had started to feel impossible to ignore. Inside the house, fear had settled into a strange routine. Outside, life moved on, but not without noticing what was missing. The wife woke up early, exhausted though she had barely slept. Her body felt heavy, as if carrying a weight she could not put down. She moved through the house slowly, avoiding certain rooms, avoiding certain thoughts. Everywhere she looked, she saw signs of Amina's presence. A folded cloth. A mug left untouched. These small reminders felt louder than screams. The employer acted differently now. He was overly alert, watching the clock, checking his phone repeatedly. Every sound from outside made him tense. A knock on the door, even from a delivery worker, made his heart race. Fear had become his constant companion, and it showed in his eyes, in the sharpness of his voice. That morning, he left the house earlier than usual. He said he had work matters to handle. In reality, he needed distance. Being inside that house reminded him of what he had done. He believed that moving around, staying busy, would somehow push the truth further away. But the truth does not move away. It waits. The wife was left alone with her thoughts. For the first time since the night of the incident, she allowed herself to fully think about Amina, not as the maid, or the problem, but as a young woman who had come seeking a better life. She thought about how scared Amina must have felt in her final moments. That thought broke something inside her. Guilt crept in slowly, then all at once. Not guilt for the affair, that anger still burned, but guilt for staying silent afterward. For allowing fear and reputation to matter more than a human life. She realized that silence had made her part of something she never wanted to be part of. Outside the house, questions were beginning to form. Amina had friends, other domestic workers she spoke to occasionally. Women who shared stories, worries, and hope in quiet moments. When Amina stopped responding to messages, they noticed. At first, they assumed she was busy or stressed. But as hours turned into days, concern grew. One friend tried calling the house. No answer. Another sent messages that remained unread. These women knew the risks of being invisible. They knew that when someone like them disappeared, it was often ignored. That fear pushed one of them to speak up, quietly asking around. Neighbors also began to notice changes. The maid who once took out the trash, cleaned the yard, and moved through the house daily was gone. The wife now did these tasks herself, awkwardly, like someone unfamiliar with the routine. Small things, but noticeable. A neighbor mentioned it casually to another. Then to someone else. Nothing dramatic, just curiosity. But curiosity is often the first step toward discovery. Inside the house, tension between the husband and wife grew sharper. They spoke less, but when they did, it was bitter. The wife questioned his plans, his lies. She asked how long he thought this could continue. He snapped back, accusing her of being weak, of not understanding what was at stake. "What's at stake?" she finally asked. "Your reputation or a life?" He had no answer. That question haunted her. It replayed in her mind again and again. She started thinking about what would happen if the truth came out later instead of now. How much worse it would be. How much deeper the damage would go. The employer, meanwhile, was making another serious mistake. He believed that time was on his side. That if enough days passed, interest would fade. That Amina's disappearance would be explained away as a runaway maid, a common and convenient excuse. He underestimated how closely such cases are watched, especially when someone disappears without documents, money, or notice. By the third day, someone finally contacted authorities, not officially, but informally. A concern was raised. A question asked? Nothing dramatic yet, but enough to put Amina's name into a system. Enough to start a trail. That same day, an official inquiry reached the household. A simple visit. Routine questions. Where was the maid? When was she last seen? The employer answered calmly, too calmly. He said she had left suddenly, probably returned home. He showed no concern. No surprise. This was another mistake. People who disappear suddenly usually leave signs, bags packed, goodbyes said, wages collected. None of that applied to Amina. The answers did not fit. The official noted it quietly, without accusation, but with interest. The wife stood nearby, silent. Her heart pounded as she listened to the lies spoken so easily. She felt physically ill. Every word pulled her further away from the man she once trusted. In that moment, she realized something important. The truth was coming, with or without her help. After the visit, the employer exploded in anger. He blamed the wife for not acting normal enough, for looking nervous. He warned her to stay quiet, to follow his lead. His control had turned into desperation. But desperation makes people sloppy. That night, the wife barely slept. Her conscience was louder than her fear now. She imagined Amina's mother waiting for a call that would never come. She imagined the truth being discovered years later, and her children asking why she said nothing when she could have. By morning, something had changed inside her. Silence no longer felt like protection. It felt like betrayal. The employer noticed the shift. He sensed that he was losing control over more than just the situation. He became more aggressive, more watchful. He reminded her again of consequences, of shame, of what would happen if the story fell apart. But the story was already cracking. The outside world had started asking questions, and those questions would not stop. Every lie needed another lie to support it. Every delay increased suspicion. And every person involved was beginning to realize the same thing: the truth does not stay buried forever. Pressure does not always explode loudly. Sometimes it wears people down slowly, until one quiet moment changes everything. That is exactly what happened next. The wife reached her breaking point not during an argument, not during a visit from officials, but alone, sitting in the kitchen early one morning. The house was still. Too still. She stared at her hands and realized they were shaking. She had not slept properly in days. Food had lost its taste. Every mirror reminded her of a woman she no longer recognized. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine telling the truth. Not the consequences, not the shame, just the act itself. Speaking. Ending the lies. Letting the weight fall where it belonged. The thought terrified her, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. Her husband noticed the change immediately. He watched her closely, the way people do when they sense danger. He asked short questions. Where are you going? Who did you talk to? Why are you so quiet? His voice carried suspicion now, not confidence. He was no longer in control. He was trying to hold on to something already slipping away. The wife avoided his eyes. She answered briefly. Inside, her mind was racing. She knew that once she spoke, there would be no turning back. Her life would change forever. But she also knew that staying silent would destroy what was left of her conscience. That afternoon, another inquiry came. This time it was more formal. The questions were sharper. The tone more serious. Authorities were no longer just checking. They were looking. The explanation about Amina leaving suddenly no longer satisfied them. They asked about documents, belongings, phone records. Details that could not be easily explained away. The employer tried to remain calm, but cracks showed. His answers contradicted earlier statements. Small inconsistencies appeared. Dates did not line up. His confidence sounded forced. He was talking too much, explaining too much, something investigators noticed immediately. The wife sat nearby, listening. Each lie felt heavier than the last. She noticed the looks exchanged between the officials. They were polite but alert. Interested. She realized something important in that moment. The truth was no longer a matter of if, but when. After they left, the house filled with anger. The employer exploded. He accused his wife of ruining everything. He said her behavior had raised suspicion. He reminded her of what they would lose if the truth came out. His voice was loud, sharp, desperate. This was not the man she married. This was someone driven entirely by fear. And then, in a moment he would regret forever, he crossed another line. He threatened her. Not directly, not with violence, but with words meant to scare her into silence. He talked about consequences. About isolation. About blame falling on her too. About how no one would believe her if she spoke now. His message was clear: stay quiet, or suffer. Instead of silencing her, those words did the opposite. Fear had kept her quiet before. Now anger joined it. Anger at him. Anger at herself. Anger at the injustice of it all. She realized that he was willing to let everyone else burn just to save himself. That night, she made a decision. She waited until he left the house the next morning. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone. She considered calling a family member, then stopped. This could not be handled privately anymore. It was already too big. Too serious. Too final. She contacted authorities. At first, she spoke carefully. She did not confess everything at once. She said she needed to talk. That something terrible had happened. That a young woman was missing, and the truth was being hidden. Her voice broke as she spoke. Years of control, silence, and fear poured out in fragments. That single call changed the direction of the entire case. Investigators returned, this time with a different energy. The questions were no longer polite. They were direct. Firm. Focused. The house was no longer just a place of concern, it was now a place of interest. The employer sensed the shift immediately. Panic hit him harder than ever before. He realized he had lost his strongest shield, silence. His wife, the one person he thought would protect him, had stepped away. When confronted again, his story began to fall apart completely. The more he spoke, the worse it became. Contradictions piled up. His tone shifted from confident to defensive to aggressive. These changes did not go unnoticed. Evidence started to surface. Small details at first. Timelines. Phone data. Movements that did not match his statements. What he believed he had controlled was now being examined piece by piece. The wife finally told the full truth. She spoke about the affair. About the confrontation. About the night everything went wrong. Her words were not calm or polished. They were emotional, broken, and honest. She did not try to excuse herself. She admitted her silence. Her fear. Her regret. That honesty mattered. It did not erase what happened, but it gave investigators something they had been waiting for, a clear path forward. The case was no longer about a missing maid. It was about a crime hidden behind power and fear. For Amina's family, the truth was still far away. They did not yet know what had happened to their daughter. But the silence that surrounded her disappearance was finally breaking. The employer was taken in for questioning. The image he had built so carefully began to crumble. Friends distanced themselves. Support faded. Power means little once the truth steps into the light. Once the silence broke, everything moved quickly, but not easily. Truth does not rush. It unfolds piece by piece, often in ways no one expects. For investigators, this was no longer just a missing person case. It had become a matter of uncovering what really happened inside that house, and every detail mattered. The employer sat in an interview room, no longer in control of his surroundings. The calm confidence he once carried was gone. In its place was irritation, denial, and visible fear. He repeated his story again and again, but each time it sounded different. Dates shifted. Timelines changed. Small details didn't match earlier statements. These inconsistencies were not dramatic, but they were powerful. They told investigators exactly what they needed to know: he was lying. Meanwhile, the house was examined carefully. What once looked like an ordinary home was now treated differently. Investigators moved slowly, methodically, noting everything. Marks that had been ignored before were now questioned. Objects were photographed. Spaces were measured. Nothing was assumed. In cases like this, the smallest detail can speak the loudest. The wife was questioned again, this time in depth. She was no longer trying to protect anyone. Her voice shook, but her story stayed the same. That consistency mattered. She spoke about the tension in the days leading up to the incident. About the argument. About the fear. About the moment she realized things had gone too far. She did not hide her own failure to act sooner. That honesty made her testimony stronger. Phone records were reviewed. Messages were examined. Patterns emerged: late-night communications, sudden gaps, moments of contact that lined up too closely with key events. What once felt private was now evidence. The affair, which had lived in whispers, was becoming documented fact. Then came the hardest part: finding Amina. This step weighed heavily on everyone involved. For investigators, it was about answers. For the wife, it was about facing reality. For Amina's family, though they did not yet know the full truth, it would mean the end of hope and the beginning of grief. Search efforts began based on information gathered during questioning. At first, the employer denied knowing anything useful. But pressure has a way of breaking resistance. Hours of questioning. Contradictions pointed out. Evidence placed carefully in front of him. The image he tried to protect was already gone. What remained was fear. Eventually, his silence cracked. What he revealed confirmed the worst fears. The location. The attempt to hide what happened. The belief that the truth could be buried along with the evidence. These admissions were not spoken with regret, but with exhaustion. A man realizing that the story he tried to control had escaped him completely. When Amina was found, the case crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. What had been suspected was now undeniable. A missing person was now a confirmed victim. The weight of that reality settled heavily on everyone involved. News of the discovery spread quickly among investigators, then outward. For those working the case, it was a moment of quiet respect. Behind every file, every photo, every report, there was a human life. A young woman who had left home believing she was stepping into opportunity, not into danger. The employer was formally charged. The power he once held meant nothing now. His name, once associated with success and respect, was now linked to something else entirely. The system he believed he could avoid was now closing in around him. The wife faced her own reality. While she was not charged with causing harm, she carried a different burden, one of guilt and regret that would follow her for the rest of her life. She had survived, but survival did not feel like victory. It felt like living with questions that would never fully be answered. Amina's family was finally informed. The call did not bring comfort. There is no gentle way to tell parents that their child is gone, especially when that child traveled far with hope in her heart. Shock came first. Then disbelief. Then a pain so deep it could not be expressed in words. They asked questions that had no satisfying answers. Why her? Why there? Why trust? For the public, the story began to take shape. Headlines focused on the affair, the power imbalance, the violence. Opinions formed quickly. Some people judged harshly. Others expressed outrage. Many asked the same question again and again: how could this happen inside an ordinary home? But true crime stories are rarely about one moment. They are about systems. About silence. About power being abused behind closed doors. And about people whose voices are easy to ignore until it is too late. As the case moved forward, one thing became clear: Amina could no longer speak for herself. But the evidence now spoke for her. Every detail uncovered, every truth revealed, pushed the story closer to justice.